We're on.
My name is Amy Galpin, and I'm the curator of the Frost Art Museum at FIU. We acknowledge that the Frost Art Museum of FIU is located on the homelands of the Tequesta and the Seminole Tribe of Florida. This exhibition, The Inside World, Contemporary Aboriginal Australian Memorial Poles from the Dennis and Debra Scholl collection, gives us an opportunity to learn about the Indigenous cultures of Australia. Furthermore, it inspires us to learn and reflect on the Indigenous cultures of the United States. We invite you to join us in learning more about the Indigenous cultures of the past and of the present. I would like to extend my gratitude for those of you who have joined us today. Many of you have supported the realization of this exhibition, The Inside World. A special thanks to our members who buoy our institution with their vital support. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you my esteemed colleague, Dr. Henry Scarrett, Curator of Indigenous Arts of Australia at the Kluge-Ruhe Art Museum at the University of Virginia. Henry is an accomplished scholar, widely recognized for his contribution to understanding the contemporary Indigenous arts of Australia. He edited the catalog for the exhibition and was incredibly influential in the presentation of our exhibition here in Miami. Henry will give you a preview of the exhibition this afternoon. We encourage you to use the chat function to offer comments and ask questions. Henry, as always, thank you for your collaborative spirit and good cheer. I will hand the proceedings over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy. I feel it's really sad not to be able to come down to Miami for the opening, a city that I love so much. And I feel like because I'm delivering this lecture here in Virginia, I should also acknowledge the Monacan, who are the owners of the land from which I'm giving this lecture, as well as the Tequesta and the Seminole, where the exhibition is being held. So I'd like to pay my respects to all of their elders past and present, as well as the elders past and present from wherever the people watching us are coming from. So the inside world, it's really this is the sort of end of a big journey for this exhibition, but also for myself working with Debra and Dennis Scholl on, we've worked together on 3 exhibitions over the last 7 years, which have gone all across the country, including a couple to the Frost. So it's a big moment having this exhibition finishing its run at an institution that I know is very, very important to Debra and Dennis as alum of FIU. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an introduction to this exhibition. I'm going to share my screen now so that you can see my pictures. Okay, so the inside world. While we're all stuck in our homes, I'm going to kind of try and transport you to this very, very special part of the world called Arnhem Land. Now, Arnhem Land, you can see it here in this picture. It's all of the sort of shaded parts. It takes up about 37,000 square miles of Northern Australia. And to put that into context, that's actually about the size of Virginia, or about 3/4 of the size of Florida. And it's home to about 12,000 Indigenous Australians who speak over 20 languages. So that's where this exhibition comes from. It's a place that is spectacularly beautiful, from the stone country in the west to the sparkling beaches of the east. It's just a truly magnificent place. It's also a place with an extremely vibrant and living culture. Hey, Poll 1, have you ever been to Australia? Yes, I have. I'm guessing that I don't even get to vote in that. Okay, so it's a place with this very vibrant living culture, one that draws on ancient practices as well as more recent, a more recent history of engagement with visitors, first from Makassar in modern Indonesia, and later Europeans, the first of whom were the Dutch, who arrived in 1623, and that's why it's called Arnhem Land. It's named after the first ship to visit the region. But it was really not until the early 20th century that Arnhem Land felt the brunt of British colonisation. So we're talking about a very recent history of British arrival in Arnhem Land. Starts around about 1900 and really takes force around the 1930s. Now, why are we talking about Arnhem Land? Well, one of the reasons is that Arnhem Land is a place that has played a really oversized role in the history of art of Australia, and particularly the art of Australia as it's been seen around the world. Many of the first Indigenous Australian artworks to be exhibited in Australia, the US, and Europe came from Arnhem Land, and they continue to produce cutting-edge artists whose works compete on an international level. So here we've got, down the bottom, Jumbo and Marawili showing at the Istanbul Biennale. We've got Marking the Infinite at New Orleans, Art of Australia, which was organised by the Carnegie Institute and MoMA in New York. So at all of these important moments, this art has appeared around the world as a representative of Australian Indigenous cultures. Now, in the next kind of 10, 15 minutes, I'm not going to have time to cover the whole art of Arnhem Land, and neither does this exhibition. What it does is it surveys contemporary practice from Arnhem Land using a single form, the hollow log coffin or memorial pole, as they're called now. And so the question that I kind of want to ask is, how did this form that was once used for funeral practices, a coffin for bones of the deceased, how did it become this? How did it become this form that was so attractive to contemporary artists and innovated upon in such interesting ways? So as I mentioned, once upon a time, these poles were used as ossuaries. At the very end of a long and complicated funeral process, the bones of the deceased would be placed into one of these hollowed logs that would be naturally hollowed out by termites. And the logs would be painted with designs which would be designed to help the soul go on its final journey back to its ancestral country. So how did these become art? Well, in 1988, this story sort of begins, and this form bursts onto the art world through an exhibition called the Aboriginal Memorial, which was staged as part of the Sydney Biennale of 1988. 1988 was a very politically charged year. It was the year of the Australian bicentenary, so 200 years since the invasion of Australia by the British. And when they were invited to participate in the Sydney Biennale, the artists of Ramingining thought that they would create this memorial made up of 200 poles, one for each year of the British occupation. And this installation, it was a very powerful political metaphor. It was a powerful rejoinder to all the official festivities that were taking place across the country to celebrate the British anniversary. And in this context, each log became a metaphor for all of the Indigenous Australians who died defending their country. But it was also an extraordinarily powerful piece of installation art. And for many, it was the first time that the idea of Aboriginal art as contemporary art really sort of started coming into focus. And what I want to argue is that from this point, these objects, which are now very much made as art objects, became art because they could take on a whole range of really important, immense, metaphoric and allegorical meanings that made them really ripe for insertion into contemporary art. So what I'm trying to say is these are not just one-dimensional objects. They're not just a traditional form, but they're actually a form that speaks to both tradition and innovation in a very particular cross-cultural context of the art world. Like most Aboriginal art, I think that memorial poles, contemporary memorial poles, are driven by a very cross-cultural motive. And what I mean by that is that they're made really to present the value of their culture, of Aboriginal culture, to outsiders. And I think a good place to start is this magnificent group of poles from Goombalanya in Western Arnhem Land. So you look at a pole like this one by Joe Goimala, and Joe says that this pole is about showing outsiders, Ballender, whitefellas, non-Indigenous Australians, what hollow logs were used for. They were used as containers for bones. So Joe has painted these with images of skeletons all over them. Okay, now one of the things that's really interesting when Joe talks about these things is that he says, well, these are like coffins, but coffins, they're made for Indigenous people to remember their dead. They're made for this memorial process. And in creating these to show what they were used for, he's also sort of illustrating a whole process of memorialization. If we look at his colleague, Gabriel Marlingura, Gabriel's work derives very, very closely from the rock art tradition of the same region. In fact, if you look at this image of Gabriel painting this work, you'll see he's painting a large Saratoga here. This pole is in fact this one here on the second from the left. But you'll see up here at Inyalak Hill, on the rock art sites of Inyalak Hill, you'll see an almost identical Saratoga. So you'll see that Gabriel there is drawing upon an artistic tradition that extends around about 50,000 years back, this palimpsestic tradition where every successive generation of artists has come to the rock art and painted a new layer on top. And I've often thought, looking at Gabriel's works, that they were a sort of art history in themselves. What he's done here is he's painted older art styles and newer art styles, all overlapping in the way that we see them on the rock art faces. Now, that's a really interesting thing, because we could say, well, look, Gabriel is painting here a tradition that's 50,000 years old, but what he's also painting is the ways in which traditions build up and are layered and things change. And in an odd way, that's not what would have ever been painted on a hollow log coffin. Hollow log coffins would have had very specific gland designs related to the person who was interned in them. But what Gabriel's trying to show you here is a whole history, a continuing history, an unfolding history, a history that both looks to the past, but also is here in the present. Now, it's very hard to talk about contemporary Aboriginal art without talking about this fella, John Moangel. John Moangel is really one of the most famous contemporary Indigenous artists. And Moangel comes from the same area, roughly, as Gabriel and Joe, but you'll notice that his work does not have that figurative rock art tradition. Instead, Moangel became a very famous artist by exploring the power of these abstract cross-hatched designs that he would call raak, that are known as raak. Now, originally, these designs would be painted on the body of initiates during ceremony. But Moangel's taken those designs and he's really abstracted them. And when he describes the work, what he says he's trying to achieve is to give you a sense of the power of the ancestral beings in the landscape. So what he'll say is that, if you look at the landscape, you can see in the shimmer of the waters and the ways in which the light refracts off particular leaves and trees. That's the sign that the ancestors are there in the present. Now, in Moangel's work, he's not trying to paint you a picture of those ancestors necessarily. He's not trying to teach you the story of those ancestral beings, but he's just trying to give you a glimpse at their power, right? The idea being that behind this shimmering power, there is an inside world. There is a world of there is a world of spiritual and ancestral power that informs all things. And he's not, he's trying to play a very careful game here of not giving away too much of that power, but using it in an aesthetic way to sort of win you over, to make you realize the sort of self-evidence of the power that he's talking about. And in a way, that's a very contemporary idea too, because he's really talking about the ways in which this long history can be seen and felt and just got at in the lived environment. That strange extrasensory sense that you might have when you're wandering through a magical landscape like that of Arnhem Land. And in all of these works, I think we see this push and pull of tradition. We could say that he's a very innovative abstractionist, but at the same time, his abstraction is coming from a very traditional place. We also see innovations in the ways in which women have approached this medium. And one particularly striking place is at the artists from Milingimbi, the Garawura family, whose work you will recognize immediately in this exhibition because of its distinctive use of these three colors, red, white, and yellow. And they call those designs, these red, white, and yellow designs, the Jidi Didi, and say that these designs evoke the shifting sands on the banks, they evoke light, they evoke water, they evoke the kingfisher, and all of these meanings are tied up in this very simple, crisp, almost modernist design. Now, for many years, the only people with the authority to paint this design was Miki Darang Garawura, whose work is shown here on the left, and his brother Tony Danyala. But shortly before Miki Darang passed away in 2006, he passed the stewardship of these designs over to his sister, Ruth Namakara, who's pictured on the right. Ruth was one of the founders of the new Milingimbi Arts Centre, and she took these designs, and she and her sisters really took them up with such gusto and expressive force, twisting and turning them and shaping them and just painting them with such a joy that it really revitalized these designs, I think, and reintroduced them and gave them a contemporary currency that was quite astounding. In a way, I think, reflecting just the sheer joy of these women painting these designs that they had probably seen and known for most of their lives, but had now been given the authority to paint. And here we go. At the same time, if we think about this push and pull innovation and tradition, despite the fact that when Miki Darang started painting these designs, some curators and critics said that he was, selling out to contemporary modernism, and he was trying to be an Aboriginal Sol LeWitt. In some ways, these are actually some of the most traditional poles in the exhibition, as you can see by the way that these women are wearing the same designs, and these designs, are very, very ancient. It was just that it wasn't until very recently that they began to be put into the context of the contemporary art world. It's also been women who have been some of the greatest innovators in Aboriginal art. And one of those women that I would definitely draw your attention to is Nongara Marawili, who I think is one of the kind of greatest contemporary artists working anywhere in the world today. And, if we think about somebody like the Garawura sisters embracing the potential of ancient designs, Nongana, she's played a slightly different game where she has taken, rather than painting traditional designs, she sort of danced around them, right? She's painted these designs that bear a very strong affinity to traditional clan designs, but are just different enough that she doesn't appear to be treading on the authority of the patriarchy. And what's so neat about this as a strategy, I often think it's a really kind of Yolngu feminist gesture, is that she's not breaking any rules. She's just sort of sidestepping them, right? She's just sort of avoiding the rules. And what's really important about that is that, like any good artist, it means that when Yongu look at her work, they have to do a whole bunch of conceptual work. They have to think, like, what does this do? What does it mean? How does it mean? Exactly like outsiders from non-Indigenous communities have to as well. So we have an artist here who's really working within and across both worlds in a really, really interesting and fascinating way. Now, to return to memorial poles, I'd like to now think about one of the really innovative men, a man named Goinbi Ganamba. Now, Goinbi is sticking to those designs, but he's found ways to really embrace the form, right? So traditionally, a memorial pole would be, an artist would go and look for a very finely smooth and straight pole. But from around 2000, a number of artists, of which Goinbi's been a real leader in, have started to look for poles that have natural imperfections, that have knobs and bumps and grooves, and they've begun to play with those imperfections in order to really get at the complexity of these ideas of the natural versus the human, of the inside world versus the outside world. So if we look at this work, this is an exceptional work in the exhibition, and it's depicting designs related to a place called Garapada, which is a very important bay. And Goinbi's painted those, but you can see that what he's done is leave large chunks of the pole unsanded, unstripped. Now, the Yolngu would say that that is the skin of the tree, and that the log on the inside is the bones, right? So you see this metaphor here that the bones are stripped of their skin, just like the bones of a human would be stripped of its skin before they're placed in the hollow log. But Goinbi's taking that a step further, and what he's trying to say is, like, beneath the skin, beneath the surface, there's these inside designs. All right, there's this inside world, this spiritual world, and that world is both on the surface and inside. It's both hidden and it's both revealed, and he's getting at it here by thinking about, look at the parts where the inside is revealed and the outside is left, but in other ways, this is the water that you can see. And so I think that, to return to this idea of artists really getting at the philosophical ideas of this pole and the philosophical potential of this format, Goinbi is a really good example, because he's really twisting and turning the form to get at all of the metaphors. And if we think about funerals, if we think about ceremonies, our own funeral ceremonies, our own practices, right? All of these practices are full of metaphor. They're all full of meaning, because they're there for us to try and comprehend something that is very hard to comprehend about life and about death and about the ways in which we remember people. So, I think it's a good place to end by thinking about this artist, Wukan Wanambi, who really has been one of the great philosophers of the memorial pole. And in the exhibition, he's included with this installation, which is called Bumerungu. And Bumerungu is a rock located in a bay called Gurkawoi, where it's believed that the fish of his clan, of the Marakulu clan, swim around and around and around this rock looking for their destiny. And what Wukan says is that those fish swimming round and round the rock are like us, he says, when we go on, he says it's like what happens when we go on ancestry.com looking for our ancestors. He says all these fish are looking for their destiny. But what Wukan says is that, that's his destiny. Okay, that's the Marakulu destiny. But in surrounding his painted pole with all these unfinished poles, these poles that tell you the whole life cycle of the memorial pole, one of the ideas I think that Wukan's really getting at is that, we are all part of this cycle. Right? We're all part of the cycle of life and death, of mourning and loss. We manifest that in different ways. The surface is different, but underneath, we're all still part of this bigger complex of humanity. And I think that what strikes me going through this exhibition is that you can go through it thinking about how different these works are. And I think that's really important. It's got to be the first point you start at, thinking about that these come from a different culture. But at the same time, these works are also saying that although they come from a different culture, there are things that unite us. And those are those questions of love and life and death and mourning. And what these works are saying is that, you know, we have different ways of expressing that. We have different ways of thinking through that, but they shouldn't be barriers to our communication, right? So the one last thing I'd like to leave you with is I'd like, when you go through this exhibition, you know, approach these works on a very human level, because everyone is trying to explain something to you. And I think that if we approach them in that level, you know, in this day and age where we all need to be a little bit more understanding of our neighbours, I think there's a bigger global message that is really salient to the time that we're living in.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And we're so grateful for all of your time and energy and this wonderful presentation in this newish format. I know you've been giving lectures this whole time. So to our members, we are going to be going to Facebook Live soon. So if you will bear with us for a few minutes, we're going to have do a little bit of tech, which you will be watching us talk live about, and then we'll go live in just a few minutes. So feel free to go grab a drink. Wesley, could you please promote Dennis and Dawn so that they are on camera again? And Henry, if you could mute yourself. Great. Wesley, you promoted the wrong person. Could you, Don Slesnik, sorry. Hi, Dennis, can you do an audio check, please?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Perfect, thank you. Great, and Wesley, if you could take off Douglas, please, from the screen. Don, could you unmute so we could do a quick mic check?
Okay, how's that?
Sounds good, thank you. Excellent, thank you. All right, Wesley, if you'll put up your screen to the welcome screen, we can go to Facebook Live as, and you'll just let us know, Wesley, when we start.
Sure.
Thank you. Oh, Don and Dennis, could you mute yourselves, please?
We are live.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mariana Ramirez, and I'm the Manager of Strategic Initiatives at the Frost Art Museum at Florida International University. First, I would like to acknowledge that the Frost Art Museum, FIU, is located on the homelands of the Tequesta and the Seminole Tribe of Florida. At the end of today's program, we will list several sites where you can learn more about present and past Indigenous cultures and land right acknowledgements. Please stay connected with us on social media and through our newsletter to learn more about our fall programming that highlights Indigenous voices. Now, thank you all so much for joining us for the virtual opening of the Inside World Contemporary Aboriginal Australian Memorial Poles from the Debra and Dennis Scholl collection. Our museum is located on the main campus of Florida International University. I'm coming to you from my home in Fort Lauderdale, and our wonderful staff assisting us tonight is spread across South Florida. While we are not open to the public at this time, I am so pleased that we are able to bring people together to give you a glimpse of this amazing exhibition. Our director, Dr. Jordana Pomeroy, regrets that she is unable to join us tonight, so we'd like to share a video message from her.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jordana Pomeroy, the director of the Patricia and Philip Frost Art Museum at FIU. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had to make a lot of choices about our exhibition schedule, not knowing if we would be closed for a few weeks or a few months. Through the ingenuity of our staff and the generosity of our lenders, we were able to amend our
Apologies, we're just having a slight technical error. We'll be with you in just a moment. Hi, everyone. I apologize for that. I actually have Jordana's notes, so I will read part of her message for you. So as she was saying, we had to make a lot of choices about our exhibition schedule, not knowing if we would be closed for a few weeks or a few months. Through the really our brilliant staff, we were able to amend our schedule. Throughout June, a small number of staff members alternated working on site to install the Inside World. I'd like to thank Kevin McGarry, Lourdes Renero, Yadi Rivero, and Jean Carlos Fernandez, as well as our security team, Luis Taberas and Aileen Nodarse, for making this exhibition possible. In addition, Jordana wanted to express her thanks to Ashley Valinas and, of course, Dr. Amy Galpin, who you will hear from shortly. I am also sending Jordana's thanks to, as well as my own, to Debra and Dennis Scholl for lending these beautiful works to our museum. They've both been incredibly supportive of the Frost, and Dennis is a proud FIU alum and passionate collector. We are so pleased that we're able to share their work with the museum and Miami community. Though the exhibition is installed at the museum, we are not open to the public at this time. While we are preparing for the day we can open, we are following university and county guidelines. We care deeply about the safety of our staff and visitors, and we do not have a definitive reopening date at this time. However, we are planning virtual programs throughout the fall and hope you'll join us for those. Now, earlier today, members of the Frost Art Museum had the opportunity to go on a virtual tour with the Inside World's curator, Dr. Henry Scarrett. We are so grateful to our members for their continued support, especially those who have continued to renew their memberships, even though we are still closed. We would like to ask those watching to consider becoming a member of the museum if you're able to do so. We are continuing to plan members-only virtual events throughout the fall, and once we're able to open, we will invite members to come back to the museum first. You can find out more about membership on our website, as well as at the end of this program. Now, I'd like to share, actually, I think we are still having some technical difficulties. So if you'll bear with us, hopefully we'll be able to come back and, here we go, wonderful. I'd like to share a teaser video featuring Dr. Henry Scarrett. This 3-minute clip will give you a glimpse into the exhibition.
All right, so now we're in the exhibition. Take a look around. What do you see? What do you feel? To me, it's like walking in a forest. Here we are surrounded by 112 memorial poles. Each one was once a tree that's been hollowed out but naturally by termites. It's had its bark stripped and it's been painted with these very beautiful designs. Now, when we walk around here, we're going to walk from west to east, and I want you to look at how different each of these poles are. There's no one Aboriginal people. When Captain Cook arrived in Australia in April of 1770, there was 500,000 people living there of over 300 different language groups, right? And each of them was different, as different as you can imagine somebody who lives in Minnesota being from somebody who lives in Florida, right? And so as we walk around, we're looking at people who are related. All of these artists are related in some way. They're related by the places they come from. They're related by the ancestral narratives that connect them all. But I also want you to look at how different and distinctive each of the artists are, because these are artworks. Now, once upon a time, poles like these would have been made for a very specific purpose. They were made to house the bones of the deceased. When an Aboriginal person died, there would be an enormous funeral ceremony. There would be sacred songs that would be sung. There would be dances performed. The bodies would be smoked and painted with sacred ancestral designs. And at the end of all of this ceremony, the body would be placed to dry, either on a rock crevice or on a raised platform, until all of the flesh had decayed from the body. At that point, the family would collect the bones and they would carry them. They would carry them around with them for a number of months until they felt that the spirit had finally left those bones and that person had returned to the ancestral realm. At that point in time, they'd get the bones and they would stick them in a hollow log coffin just like these. And those coffins would be painted with special designs that would help the spirit return to its ancestral home. Of course, today, that practice is no longer done. People don't like to keep bodies out on raised platforms. So today, most Aboriginal people will be buried in the ground, similarly to practices here in the USA. However, memorial poles are still made. They're still made for ceremony. But more importantly, today, they're also made for art. And that's what we see around us. Each one of these works reflects those ancient traditions, and it has a connection to those ancient traditions, but at the same time it reflects the individual artistry of every one of these artists. So let's have a look at a couple of specific works.
Great, thank you so much. As you saw, the poles are absolutely stunning pieces of artwork. I am very grateful to Henry for sharing his knowledge and passion with us. Thank you so much. And the Inside World has given us the opportunity to build local, national, and global partnerships. I'm so pleased to introduce to you Don Slesnik, Honorary Consul for Australia, based here in Coral Gables, to say a few words. Oop, Don, I think you're on mute right now.
There you go. I'm back. I wish I could be with you in person. I have no mute button in person, so I'm not used to that. But I'm pleased to be here, and I'm also especially pleased to bring greetings from the Australian ambassador to the United States, Arthur Sinodinos, who talked to me this afternoon and wanted everyone to know how excited he is about this exhibit being here in Miami. And greetings from the people of Australia. The Miami Consulate and the Washington Embassy are proud to partner with the Florida International University Frost Museum and with Dennis and Debra Scholl in sponsoring or partly sponsoring the Inside World exhibit, which introduces South Floridians to the folk art and cultural traditions of the Australian Aboriginal population. FIU, as a matter of fact, maybe many people don't realize, has a definable history of partnering with Australia, and that this is the second Frost Museum Aboriginal art exhibit to be presented here. And also in 2015, the College of Business entered into an agreement of exchange and cooperation with Monash University in Melbourne. Thus, FIU and the Scholl family are important participants in the linkage between our two nations of Australia and the United States. And for that, I offer, as the Honorary Counsel, I offer my personal thank you to both the Scholls and to Florida International University. And of course, I hope that as we emerge from the coronavirus pandemic, that everyone that's watching this, and many more people, in fact, will have the opportunity to personally visit this wonderful exhibit. I know I'm looking forward to that opportunity myself. And so again, thank you for having me with you tonight. We are so pleased that Australia is here in Miami again, and that people have a chance to understand the original Aboriginal population of Australia. So thank you.
John, thank you so much.
And I'll go back to being muted.
Okay. Thank you so much, and for your wonderful and kind message. We really appreciate it. I'd now like to introduce my colleague and good friend, our Chief Curator, Dr. Amy Galpin. She has deftly handled the curatorial team through this unprecedented time. And I am so grateful, as well as the whole museum is so grateful for her leadership. Amy, thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Good afternoon. As the Chief Curator of the Frost Art Museum, it is my incredible honor to work with Dennis and Debra Scholl. In their support and dedication to the Aboriginal arts of Australia, they have not only collected and commissioned work, but they also plan to gift a number of works to institutions. The Frost Art Museum is proud to be a beneficiary of their extraordinary generosity. Now that you've seen a video with a few images of the memorial poles, and before Dennis and I engage in a little conversation, I wanted to share a few highlights with you of the exhibition. At the end of the reception today, we will post a virtual tour on our Facebook page. And like Don, I do hope that you will be able to see the show in person later this year. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And here we are at the Frost Art Museum. As you walk into the exhibition, you find yourself immersed amongst these memorial poles. Here I'm showing a detail and an installation of poles by Wukan Wanambi. Wukan Wanambi is from the Yirrkala region, and he refers to this installation as a cycle. Here you see some unfinished logs. Then the white logs that you see have their undertone of paint. And in the middle, you have a memorial pole that has been painted with a fish pattern. And I'm sharing with you a detail of that fish pattern. Another area of the exhibition that I particularly find engaging is memorial poles from Malingbi, a small island with about 800 Indigenous Australians off the northern part of Arnhem Land. One of the things that's very interesting about this particular tradition, you see the distinctive color palette. There was a noted artist by the name of Mickey Darren who chose, instead of just exclusively teaching his male heir, to teach his sister Ruth and other women this particular tradition. And in our exhibition and our presentation at the Frost of the Inside World, a number of these poles from Malingbi are by women artists, including Margaret Raru. Just a couple more images to share with you of the Frost Art Museum. This gives you kind of an overall view of the installation. You see a map of Arnhem Land in the background. Up close, you are seeing some memorial poles that are tied to the Inyalak Art Center. Inyalak is an area in which rock art is particularly a strong tradition. And on the right, you have a memorial pole by Gabriel Maralangura that refers to the rock traditions. You also see in this grouping here of memorial poles work by Joe Goimala, and he chooses to paint a skeleton on the exterior of the memorial pole to refer to the historic tradition of making these memorial poles and the traditional use of these particular memorial poles. And I have one more image to share with you, again, giving you an overall sense of this installation, this contemporary art that celebrates and also educates us about this tradition. I will stop sharing my screen, and it is my pleasure to invite filmmaker, collector, and president and CEO of Oolite Arts, Dennis Scholl, to share some insight into this exhibition. Hello, Dennis.
Good to see you, Amy.
I wanted to know, just right off the bat, if you could tell us a little bit about how you and Debra became interested in the Aboriginal arts of Australia.
Start by saying thanks to Don. He's been a really great supporter in his role for Australia, for us, for this art. And also want to thank Henry Skerritt, who you got to see a little bit of. And of course, you know, my alma mater, FIU, and the Frost Art Museum. So we're very, very appreciative for this opportunity again. And as you made note of, it's our intention to make the museum a repository in a shared gift with the Metropolitan Museum in New York and the Nevada Museum of Art. I know my friend Joanne is watching, the curator there, of 200 of these works. So we're happy about that. And I'll get to have a place to always come to see this work for the rest of my life. So I'm excited about that. You know, this all started about 12 or 13 years ago. Debra and I had been making wine in Australia. We, this year will be our 20th vintage, actually. And I had reached a point in the contemporary art world where I just kind of lost my way a little bit. I'd been collecting for many, many years, and it just wasn't as interesting to me anymore. It had gotten to be a lot about money and a lot about personality. And I went to Australia, as I had been going very regularly to make the wine. And while I was there, I was meeting with a friend. Most of my friends are curators, so it was a curator at the MCA Australia, the Museum of Contemporary Art. And she said, "Boy, I know you're collecting contemporary art. I know you're a little down on the New York art world." She said, "Have you seen our Aboriginal art?" And I said, "Well, not really. I'd seen a little bit of stuff, but it was mostly tourist art." And she sent me to the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And she sent me down the escalator, because they keep the work actually in the basement of all places. I turned the corner, there was the work, blew my mind immediately. Just everything about it was an epiphany, really. I subsequently got on the plane that night to go home, got off the plane, walked into our home, and I said to Debra, "You're not gonna believe what we're gonna do next." It was literally that moment. And that started us on this incredible 13-year journey. Now, the poles themselves came out of a lot of work before that. We started working probably 7 or 8 years ago with Henry Skerritt. He's probably the foremost authority on this work in America, and really very high up there in Australia too. And Henry and I had dozens and dozens of conversations about what the third exhibition that we wanted to do of this work might be. We had done a men's show and we had done a women's show. And we chose to bifurcate them by gender because they don't really work together, paint together. Their society is very separate that way when it comes to the making of art. But we knew we wanted to do one more show. And Henry took me to Arnhem Land. And I started to see these poles. It was a bit of a dying practice, I would say. It wasn't something that was being done in all these communities on a regular basis. There hadn't been a lot of Western interest in the work. It was still a very important part of their ceremony and their culture, but it hadn't been artwork. And so we started to ask ourselves, what if we went to these communities and asked these artists who had many of them had retired their practice, would they make new work for us? It's very important for people to understand that these poles are art objects. There are no poles in this show that have been used as hollow log coffins. They are all created as art objects. We don't want to collect ceremonial work from the communities. We simply went to them and said, as I always do, "Man, this work is beautiful. Would you consider creating a series of works for us?" And we jumped on a plane and we hopped from Yirrkala, and then we went to Milingimbi, and then we went to Manangrita, and then we went to what I call Inulik. That's just the name of the art center there. And each place we gathered the artists and we sat down and talked to them and said, would you consider allowing us to commission you to make work for what we hope will be a big show in America? People were really excited. And so we wound up commissioning 51 artists to make a total of approximately 100 of these memorial poles.
That's amazing. It's really incredible and such a treat for us to present this work at the Frost. You kind of alluded to it in your response, but I wondered if you could share with our audiences a little bit more about the art centers. I know we're planning to do a virtual program with the Art Center in Yirrkala, and maybe you could just share an experience or two of working with them.
Ask me, what are the handful of places that you would want to return to that you've been to in your life? I would choose Yirrkala. It's an extraordinary place. It is a place that hasn't been so consumed by Western world, as Henry alludes to. The Aboriginals call us the white fellas. It hasn't been, consumed that way. It doesn't have a lot of those issues you see in the other communities. All over the Aboriginal communities, there are art centers. The creation of art is a huge and important cultural reference point for all of the Aboriginal communities. And something I love really very much is that the artists in the Aboriginal communities are the leaders. In Yirrkala, Jumbawa Marawili, who has 4 or 5 poles in this show, he's the guy. And the Prime Minister of Australia calls up Jumbawa and asks him what he thinks on a regular basis. So imagine in our society, if we treated artists with that kind of reverence, what a different life we would live, what a different way that we would think about ourselves. So there are these art centers everywhere, and they are primarily for the production of art to be sold. And in many of these communities, it is the only legitimate way of generating income for many of the folks. I went to an art center in the Western Desert of Australia with Henry, and there's about 300 people that live there, and 70 of them were working successful artists. The range of talent, the breadth of talent is extraordinary. And so we went to Yirrkala, which is really, like I said, one of the most amazing places I've ever been in my life. And then we hopped across on a bush plane to go to each of the communities. And the artists were just waiting to be asked, frankly. And the result has been amazing. Those Inulik poles that you referenced before with Joe Goyama and some of the other folks, I mean, we weren't sure about what was going to come out of that. And I asked them to each make 1 pole. And as the poles came in, I immediately got on the phone and said, will you make me another one? Because they were just so beautiful and so thoughtful.
That's so great, and really wonderful to hear about your traveling, across Arnhem Land. I think you mentioned to me once that you had met many people in Australia, and for me as an American, I've been to Sydney, I've been to Canberra, but that's it. And how rare it is for people to have traveled as outsiders, to have traveled as extensively as you have in Arnhem Land.
Ever met an Australian person in a random setting, like at a restaurant, or you hear somebody speak and you go, oh, are you from Australia? Because I have a long history. I've been going there for 20 years now because of the wine. And I've never met an Australian person who doesn't immediately say to me, you've been to Arnhem Land? 6 times, 5 times? I've never been to Arnhem Land. In fact, I don't know anybody that's been to Arnhem Land. Well, it's not like it's the land that time forgot. It's just a beautiful, amazing, glorious part of the world. And I love it every time I get to go.
Fabulous. I want to remind our viewers that if you'd like to ask questions, if you're watching us on Zoom, feel free to use the chat. But if you're watching us on Facebook, please feel free to comment and we'll get those questions asked. Dennis, I wondered if you could talk a little bit more. For example, in the catalog, which I hope everyone will get to see, there's an essay by Diana Nowie, who will be familiar to many of our Miami audience members as a former curator of the Perez Art Museum. but you and Henry, I imagine, commissioned her to write this essay that really contextualizes the Aboriginal artists within the work of other contemporary artists like Nari Ward and Jeffrey Gibson. Was that part of the impetus of this project, was to think about these artists in context with art being produced in Buenos Aires or London?
It was the complete idea of doing this. This art is some of the greatest contemporary art being made in the world. I've said that for the last 7 years. This is the 16th museum show in America. 4 with the Poles, 6 with the women, 6 with the men, and this is great contemporary art. And each time we have asked a very well-known curator in America to kind of take off their blinders and say, okay, you guys know everything that's happening in New York, everything that's happening in London and Berlin. Where does this fit? How does this work? Why, why isn't this the greatest contemporary art in the world? And Henry Scarrett, who you saw in the beginning of the program, gives a beautiful speech about what it is to be contemporary, and it's true. Yet, this is the longest continuous art making tradition in all of mankind. There are rock paintings carbon dated back to 50,000 years ago. So the fact that there is this lineage probably is why the art is given so much reverence within their community, but it's also why the art is so extraordinary. They've been working at it a very, very long time, and it does work in context. You've seen a lot lately in Australia in particular, but also elsewhere. You've seen this work placed against other types of contemporary art from other regions of the world. And boy, it either holds up or blows everything else out of the water.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that really impresses me too about your approach is the way you've collected in depth across media, in depth with individual artists. I just recently, I got a window into the extensive works on paper. Of course, I'm more familiar with the paintings that you had previously we had previously had on exhibit and are now, a portion of which are now a part of our collection at the Frost Art Museum. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this project of working with all of these museums. We have some wonderful colleagues like Joanne Northrup and Matthew McClendon who've commented in the chat, directors, curators that you've worked with. What is your approach as a collector working with different museums on these exhibitions?
One of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure this work was seen in the heartland. We didn't really care so much if it got to New York or LA. The UCLA, the museum at UCLA has been showing some of this work over the last couple of decades. The Gray Art Gallery at NYU has shown it over the couple of decades. We did get some of the artist shows in New York, selling shows at galleries, which is a whole nother story. But we felt like it was important, if we were gonna make an argument that this was important contemporary art, we wanted to make sure that it got a very wide distribution. Did a show in Portland, Oregon, did a show in New Orleans, did a show in Charlottesville, did a show in Detroit. So the art went everywhere, and we thought that that was very, very important. Now, how do you do that? Well, we have long-standing relationships with a number of museum curators. I have always said that museum curators are the greatest bargain in the art world, because that's where you really learn about what's going on. And so, you can help a curator with a show or with a plane ticket to a Biennale or something like that. And in return, you get access to that incredible knowledge. And so this was the one moment where, for the first time, I was asking for something as opposed to, trying to help curators. And everybody stepped up. Everybody said, "You're right. The work's incredible, and it's important for my community of Reno or the other places this work went. It's important for our community to see this work." And so that's how we wound up getting 16 different museum shows.
Amazing. I had
Bargain in the art world, Amy?
I I like it a lot. I was thinking, okay, this is a good turn of phrase here. No, but I mean, it's great to feel like when you can use your knowledge and share it. And, you know, I really want to say I also appreciated something that you said earlier about artists and revering artists and listening to artists as leaders. And I see that also kind of coming to fruition as well with Oolite Arts and the work that you do with Miami-based artists as well. I wanted to ask one more question, just thinking about our walkthrough. So we were socially distant, we were wearing masks, but I did get to share the exhibition with you on Thursday morning. And you sort of reflected a little bit that this was the last venue of the Inside World and the last of several exhibitions that have been organized from your collection of Aboriginal art. And I wonder if you could kind of share with us, as you look back at all these experiences you've had, what are some of the things that really stand out?
I think going there over and over again and having this important personal life moment of beginning to relate to the idea that the artists have told me often, which is that the more you think you understand, the less you know. And this work has layers and layers and layers of meaning that has been built up over millennia. And there are some things in the work that I, as a person coming from somewhere else, not born in the bush, not being an Aboriginal of Aboriginal descent, I'm not meant to know. It is not for me to know. That is a very difficult concept for a Westerner to understand. It isn't there for you. And I will never forget that. It was a really difficult thing for me to understand because I'm somebody that dives into a project, wraps my arms around it, gathers all this knowledge, and at the end of it, I go, okay, I got it now, and I walk away. And in this case, I'll never have the knowledge that is necessary to talk about this work in the way that Jumbawa or John Maranjal or Joe Goyama, you know, this is infused in their culture in a way. It is a spiritual infusion that it simply isn't meant for me to understand. So that was a huge, huge moment. The other thing is spending time with folks there. I have often said I collect art, not artists. And I don't necessarily spend a lot of time with contemporary artists because I find it impacts how I collect and I don't want that to be there. With these folks, I was always happy to be with them. I am not somebody who sits still very often. And I remember spending hours and hours watching Yapa Yapa Yunipingu or Nangana Marawili paint, and they would talk with each other about the weird old white guy that was sitting there watching them, and they would tell jokes about me and make fun of me, and I didn't know what was up. But just the powerful internal moment that they have when they paint, it's you know, it's better than meditation, I can tell you that.
Yes, absolutely. We do have a couple questions for you from our audience. Someone watching us on Facebook says, you know, this is the first time I've had the opportunity to see Aboriginal art. And should I anticipate that I will have opportunities to see Aboriginal art in Europe, in the US? You know, can you speak to that question?
Henry is the chief curator at the Kluge-Ruhe Museum in Charlottesville, which is the only Aboriginal art only museum in America. And he has done so much for America's knowledge about that. And his shows both go up at the museum in the Kluge-Ruhe and also travel. So you will see it there. There is a lot more interest in New York recently. Gagosian just did an Aboriginal desert painting show. I've actually become friends with one of the great new collectors in America. His name is Steve Martin. You might know who he is. He's a comedian and film star. I've spent a lot of time with him talking about Aboriginal art. So there is there's a wonderful gallery in Houston that shows the work. There have been it's revered in France. The oceanic art generally is revered in France, and so Quai Branly, which is a museum in Paris, has it. It's out there. You have to go get it. You have to go see it. And so yeah, there are plenty of opportunities now. That's going forward. That's the other thing we were trying to do is we wanted to make sure that people knew of the power of this work and knew of the generosity of the artists and knew of the artists really believe that this work can bring their culture to the rest of the world and promote understanding. In the beginning, I thought, well, are they trying to save their culture? Their culture doesn't need saving. They have a very, very solid, strong cultural base, but they do want people to know about their culture. And so that's what this work does.
Definitely, definitely. We have a question from a friend of both of ours. George Fishman is asking if you could just elaborate on whether the artists that are featured in the Memorial Poles show or that make Memorial Poles, do they also work in two-dimensional formats?
And the primary way that they make is through bark paintings. So for every one of these poles that you see in the slides that you showed, when they harvest the pole, and they have literally a guy that I call the pole whisperer. He goes out and he knocks on the pole and listens to the echo to tell him whether it's been termite eaten enough or too much. And so he goes, yeah, that's the one to take down. And I've been in the forest with them doing this. Chop down the pole, bring it back, and then they slowly wet and peel the bark away off of the pole itself, so that you're left with the inner core skin of the pole. And they take that bark and they flatten it. And so the kind of clan designs, as Henry calls it, that they're painting on the poles, they're also painting on these flat kind of two-dimensional. I mean, they're not really two-dimensional because they're kind of wavy and crazy, but they're also painting on the bark. In addition to that, there's some work now that's being done, works on paper and drawings and things like that. And Summit, like your Kala, has an amazing print shop, and so they're doing limited edition prints. I have a group of 6 beautiful prints of the string games that the women play. In particular, the thing we swap the string back and forth, and they have these very complex designs that they turned into prints. So they're working in all medium, really.
Wow, that's really amazing to hear about. Well, Dennis, I really want to thank you. By the way, I have to ask, are you in fact drinking a wine from Australia?
Australian Shiraz. It's called Mother Tongue, and we actually make it. So it's my commercial here. So yes, we are drinking
Very
Shiraz.
Nice. Very nice. I want to thank you so much for being here today, but also for you and Debra's support of the Aboriginal Arts of Australia and your support of the Frost Art Museum. We are asking one question of our audience. If you're on Facebook, please type into the comments. Before today's program, were you familiar with contemporary Aboriginal Australian art? Also, my colleague, head of communications, Erica Corsano, is asking, where can we buy wine, your wine that you're drinking?
MotherTongueWines.com. Mother Tongue. So, hey, listen, I think it's important for people to know that while the show's not open now, it has a really, really long runway and isn't going anywhere. It will be at the Frost through early January. So there's a real chance that we're all going to get to see it in person and celebrate it. And at some point in time, worst case, I and you will certainly entertain the opportunity to bring, 8 or 10 people socially distant. The museum, of course, is a wonderful venue for this. The poles look like they belong there. And it really is a big space filled by the poles. So, if everybody will stay in touch and talk to Marianne about, those opportunities. If you're interested in getting a tour down the road when we're all doing what I like to call social nuzzling again. It'll be there. So please don't miss it in person. I was, really emotional seeing it a couple of days ago with you, and feel so blessed and honored that you guys were willing to take on this exhibition. Thanks so much.
And Dennis, we're hoping to get the ambassador down here too before the end of the show.
That's wonderful. Absolutely. And the show is stunning. And I do hope, I like the idea of when things are perhaps safer later on this fall, looking into the opportunity to do small tours for 10. And of course, we want to share this exhibition with you, not only in person, but also virtually. And let us know, what do you miss most about the Frost? If you're watching on Facebook Live, go ahead and type into the comments. Is it our exhibition openings? Is it the art? Is it finding a parking spot at FIU in the blue parking garage? We'd love to hear from you. Again, my thanks to Dennis and Debra Scholl. I also want to thank my wonderful colleagues, Mariana Ramirez and Carmen Carpio, who have put together all of the details for today's virtual reception. I want to remind you of one more website, frost.fiu.edu. We will be having virtual programs connected to this exhibition, so it's a great way to stay in touch with us and to keep informed about our work. I wish you all a wonderful evening, and don't go away just yet. We have some really nice closing slides, some music to share with you, and I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm Fitzroy where the stars be. I'm Wanganeen in 93. I'm mundane, I'm Kathy free. Man, that far inside of me. I'm Adam Goods and Adam should be applauded when he stands up. You can look to us from that time stuff. I'm Petty Mills with the last shot. I'm Goom, I'm March. I'm everything that you ask. I'm everything that you can't be. I'm the dead hearts, heartbeat. I'm Goom, I'm March. 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 I'm Petty Mills with $12 million. I'm Doug Nichols, I'm Jimmy Little with a Royal Telephones. I'm the world champion 68. Boy, I'm Lionel Rose. I'm William Cooper, I take a stand when no one even knows. I'm the walk-off, I'm the sound off, the children coming home. Boy, I'm Goom, I'm March. I'm everything that you ask. I'm everything that you can't be. I'm the dead hearts, heartbeat. I'm Goom, I'm March. 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 I'm Goom. Boy, I'm Patty Man. Let me take it home. I'm Rummer. I'm the Sand Hills. I'm Cummins. I'm Les Briggs. I'm Paul Briggs. I'm Uncle Ringer with all them kids. I'm Uncle Buck. Everybody loves me. Ain't none below. Ain't none above me. I'm the carving out of every sky tree. I'm those flats that Vivace now. Mr. Apple. Think about me and you. We feel the same. And it might sound strange, but I'm just saying we both unsettled when the boats came. I'm Goom. I'm March. I'm everything that you ask. I'm everything that you can't be. I'm the dead heart, heartbeat. I'm the dead heart, heartbeat. I'm the dead heart, heartbeat. Back where their hearts grow strong, back where they all long the children came. I'm the dead heart, heartbeat. The children came back. The children came back. Back where they understand, back to their mother's land. The children came back. The children came back. The children came back. Back where their hearts grow strong, back where they all belong. The children came back. I'm the dead heart,
came for the open